Welcome to Readers of the Lost Art with your presenter, Dr. Paul Anthony Taylor, a recovering academic. And the title of today's talk, Is This the Best Book You've Never Seen? Well, hi everybody, and today you'll be able to see from the thumbnail, I want to look at Ralph Ellison's brilliant novel Invisible Man, and the guy on the right here is Gordon Parks, who cooperated with him for an issue of Life magazine in 1952 when the novel came out. So all the way through this talk there are going to be images from Gordon Parks and a few from Ellison himself. He was a keen semi-professional photographer himself. And the whole point of this talk is to address the concept of identity politics, but through a book of its time that was talking about much worse race relations in America at the time. And yet, I'd argue Ellison is much more important for genuine racial reconciliation. And despite him being an obvious black author who wrote in the genre of black literature, I strongly argue that Invisible Man is one of the books that, although it's got quite a lot of recognition, I don't think it's got anywhere near the amount of recognition it should have as a work of world literature. I think it's absolutely brilliant and one of my favourite books of 20th century fiction. So it's high praise, so I'm trying to convince you how good it is by looking at only the first three chapters. If there's a lot of interest, I'll do more on this, but in the first three chapters alone, there's so much to go into, and I hope to persuade you how brilliantly written it is. And in terms of politics, identity politics, in terms of racial reconciliation, I think it goes way beyond black literature and is just a stunning novel. So I'll start off with, obviously, at the beginning, the prologue deals with the theme of light and how it relates to the concept of invisibility. And then in chapter 1, I'll be talking about a particular scene. There's lots of vignettes in the novel Invisible Man. In the very first chapter, it's got Battle Royale is when these rich community figures from the white society get these black boys blindfolded in a ring in a ballroom and basically knock 9 lumps out of each other for the entertainment of these white guys. And just before the fight starts, there's a white stripper completely naked, and that will provide the setting for then the description that I think is absolutely brilliant of the boys, the discomfort and the leering nature of these white men. And then that serves as the prelude to the fight. Then in the second chapter, as if that wasn't cheery enough, the narrator, who's never named, he's this anonymous character, hence the Invisible Man theme all the way through the novel. He's a student at this black college that's been paid for by the money of lots of philanthropists. And one of them, a white guy called Mr. Norton, asks to be driven around between sessions of this big conference. And the narrator, he asks to go off campus because he's very familiar with the campus. So the narrator chauffeurs him outside the campus, but makes the mistake of going down into some old slave cabins, and they encounter a guy called Jim Trueblood, who has impregnated both his wife and his daughter. And Mr. Norton takes a perverse interest in the story, and that's described brilliantly as the underbelly of black society. The college is black society trying to present its best face forward, and everyone's on their best behaviour, and it's middle-class, aspirational black culture. But what I think Ellison does so brilliantly is also show you the peasant class underneath that, and how it's not just a simple novel about race relations between black and white. He also shows you the tensions within the black community. So aspirational blacks feeling a sense of shame or unease when they have to deal with people more peasant stock that they think are undermining their efforts to be taken more seriously by the white population. And that tension is just brilliantly looked at. And then finally in chapter 3, it's one of my favourite chapters of 20th century literature. Mr. Norton, because he's been talking to Jim Trueblood, it's the shock of what he's been told, but also just the heat. Because off campus, where there isn't the shade of trees, there's less grass, less fountains, etc. It's really oppressively hot. So a combination of the shock of talking to Jim Trueblood and just the sheer heat. Mr. Norton, this elderly white philanthropist, gets taken ill. So the narrator has to take him, he asks for whiskey to revive himself. And the only place he can take him to is this bar stroke brothel that coincides with there's a asylum up the road for veterans who are basically suffering from shell shock, and they're on their weekly outing to the brothel. So there's just it's deadly serious stuff, but it's also, this is what I love about the novel and Ellison's skill as a writer. It's hilarious and profoundly serious at the same time, and I don't think many authors can do that. So this is from the author's introduction that I think Ellison wrote in 1981-ish. The book, remember, was published in 1952. And I think it got the National Book Award in America. It beat Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea, so he was awarded it in 1953. I asked myself, what else was there to sustain our will to persevere but laughter? And could it be that there was a subtle triumph hidden in such laughter that I had missed, but one which was still more affirmative than raw anger? A secret, hard-earned wisdom that might, perhaps, offer a more effective strategy through which a floundering Afro-American novelist could convey his vision. And that's one thing I mentioned, the humour in Ellison. And I've had a close family member basically diagnose me as having had some neurological event, because as I'm getting older, I think I might have mentioned it in another video, I'm finding more and more absurd, well, life to be more absurd, what goes on in the world around me more absurd, but also what previously probably would have upset me, I'm finding increasingly funny. So I'm resorting to humour as a psychological survival mechanism. But writers like Ellison convince me I'm not actually going potty. It actually is a legitimate response to what cannot often be an absurd world. It was a startling idea, yet the voice was so persuasive with echoes of blues-toned laughter. So this theme of blues, the novel starts off with, in the prologue, a discussion of Louis Armstrong. But this was Ralph Ellison in an article talking about Richard Wright, who I did a previous video on. So Ralph Ellison says, the blues is an impulse to keep the painful details and episodes of brutal experience alive in one's aching consciousness, to finger its jagged grain, and to transcend it, not by the consolation of philosophy, but by squeezing from it a near tragic, near comic lyricism. And that, I just wanted to highlight that quote because the key phrase there for me is not by the consolation of philosophy. I think Ellison is a perfect example of the way in which quite profound philosophical and psychological ideas sometimes are better conveyed in fiction, because of this quality of the simultaneously absurd and comic and serious that I think only has equaled a near tragic, near comic lyricism, this weird combination. And I think Invisible Man is just such a perfect embodiment of maintaining that tension successfully. And the way in which the blues he's writing about, in black culture, the blues is this heritage that took pain and terrible conditions and turned it into something else. And I've been watching, because I'm doing on the live stream some discussions about religion from an agnostic point of view, and I've been watching quite a few videos by Alex O'Connor, and one of his constant themes is the idea that it's the notion of theodicy, discussions of how can evil exist in a world where there's supposed to be a god. And without wanting to promote pain and suffering, I think what Ellison encapsulates as an author is the productive element of pain. And I won't get too sidetracked by some of his other writings, but throughout his writing, his non-fiction essays, there is this idea. He wanted to be a author that went beyond black literature. He wanted to be an author that was a genuine contributor to world culture in terms of literature. And so that's one key issue. And secondly, he argued that the American black experience was exactly that. It was American. And to isolate too much black experience from white experience, as some black nationalists would do, he argued actually undermines just a key aspect. You cannot think of America without thinking of black experience. So you're giving yourself over to the enemy's agenda if you try and separate out black experience from the whole of American history. He argued it was an inextricable part. And the role in which, through the pain and through all the bad things that happened, slavery and post-slavery, there was a an upside to, a bit like he cites in his work Dostoevsky, but Dostoevsky's writing in Russia during the time of serfdom had only recently been abolished. Social conditions amongst the peasants were terrible. The society was in upheaval and eventually led to the revolution later on. But all of that was sublimated into brilliant art. So suffering has its role. Without suffering, we all walk around. And I think, I haven't seen it yet, but I've read up on the new series, Pluribus, is it? That's got quite good traction amongst critics. The idea that what would life be like if everyone's got these stupid permagrins and everyone's happy? Ellison encapsulates this. No, life is incredibly hard sometimes, but he turns that, if you've got lemons, make it into lemonade type idea. But just to build upon that, he talks about T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland seized my mind. I was intrigued by its power to move me while eluding my understanding. Somehow its rhythms are often closer to those of jazz than with those of the black poets. And even though I could not understand them, its range of illusion was as mixed and varied as that of Louis Armstrong, and thus began my conscious education in literature. So I like Ellison as opposed to some modern black writers who are always seeking to emphasize their blackness and divide themselves off from white culture. And Ralph Ellison was right up front about the influence various white writers had upon him and how he was contributing back to the tradition of literature. And I'll show you some of them, but throughout the novel, it also reminds me bizarrely of Samuel Beckett, Waiting for Godot, in which there are funny bits. And there are funny... The book is existentially sad, but also that there's this funny absurdity to it, which you find in Beckett, you find it in Albert Camus. So it's much more significant than just a book about black conditions in America in the early 1900s and mid 1900s. So without more ado, to get stuck into, I think this is the bit from the prologue, right at the beginning. I am an invisible man. No, I am not a spook like those who haunted Edgar Allan Poe, nor am I one of your Hollywood movie ectoplasms. I am a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fibre and liquids, and I might even be said to possess a mind. I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Like the bodiless heads you see sometimes in circus sideshows. It's as though I've been surrounded by mirrors of hard, distorting glass. When they approach me, they see only my surroundings, themselves, or figments of their imagination. Indeed, everything and anything except me. And that just reminds me of, and all the way through his novel, there are allusions to scripture and other writers, but this particular bit, where are we? I've been surrounded by mirrors of hard, distorting glass in Corinthians 1, chapter, I think it's chapter 13, verse 12. It's interesting, the King James version is, for now we see through a glass, comma, darkly. But I think it's the Geneva edition where it's, for now we see through a glass darkly, without the comma. And there's been theological discussions endlessly over the significance of a comma. But this idea of it's just a brilliant image. I've always loved that image from biblical language, but I'd suggest, alluding to it here. Nor is my invisibility exactly a matter of a biochemical accident to my epidermis. That invisibility to which I refer occurs because of a peculiar disposition of the eyes of those with whom I come in contact, a matter of the construction of their inner eyes, those eyes with which they look through their physical eyes upon reality. And I think that's a brilliant literary way of expressing how ideology works. People have their inner eyes, and they either don't see or they see through a distorting glass what their actual physical eyes see, because they're biased towards presupposing their own conclusions. Is one of my favourite ways of thinking about it. They're already set in their conclusions, and everything they see is just confirmation bias. And in terms of racial reconciliation, I'd argue one of the major obstacles to that is identity politics that rests precisely upon a matter of the construction of their inner eyes. So, again, in the prologue, I love light. Perhaps you'll think it's strange that an invisible man should need light, desire light, love light, but maybe it is exactly because I am invisible. Light confirms my reality, gives birth to my form. A beautiful girl once told me of a recurring nightmare in which she lay in the centre of a large dark room and felt her face expand until it filled the whole room, becoming a formless mass while her eyes ran in bilious jelly up the chimney. It's a great phrase. And so it is with me. Without light, I'm not only invisible, but formless as well. And to be unaware of one's form is to live a death. I myself, after existing some 20 years, did not become alive until I discovered my invisibility. And in German idealist philosophy, there's this notion of subjective destitution. You only find, I think it's Schelling and people, the idea that when you enter the abyss, when the subject becomes nothing, that's when, ironically, it's like the idea of things have to get bad before they can get better. So you really find yourself at the moment of complete subjective destitution. And like I said, Gregory Parks, these photos were taken. A couple of them later on will be by Ellison himself. I'll try and point those out. But this is at the beginning. He's stealing electricity from the grid. He's got an illegal hookup to, and he's living in a basement. So it's got connotations of Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground. And he has this dream of having 5 record players so he can listen to Louis Armstrong on them at the same time. And he's got all these light bulbs. It's something like 1,363 or something. It's in that ballpark. I can't remember the precise number. It goes a long way back, some 20 years. All my life I'd been looking for something, and everywhere I turned, someone tried to tell me what it was. I accepted their answers too, though they're often in contradiction and even self-contradictory. I was naive. I was looking for myself and asking everyone except myself questions which I, and only I, could answer. It took me a long time and much painful boomeranging of my expectations to achieve a realization everyone else appears to have been born with, that I am a nobody but myself. That I am nobody but myself. But first, I had to discover that I am an invisible man. And I've emboldened 2 bits there. I just think the first bit is very relevant to today's world of influencers and social media that seeks to tell people what to think and how to be. So he's writing in the middle of the 1900s, before media had, really taken off. But it's interesting to see some of the vestigial patterns. And again, this notion of subjective destitution. But first, I had to discover that I am an invisible man. And the irony is, today everyone's hyper visible, including myself. You doing YouTube videos. Except my defense, to be fair to me, which I like to be, my defense would be, I'm asking you to read books like this, that even these books don't tell you how to think, they just make you think. And I think that's a crucial difference. And I love this. This is when he references his grandfather. But my grandfather is the one. He was an odd old guy, my grandfather, and I'm told I'd take after him. It was he who caused the trouble. On his deathbed, he called my father to him and said, "Son, after I'm gone, I want you to keep up the good fight. I never told you, but our life is a war, and I've been a traitor all my born days, a spy in the enemy's country, ever since I give up my gun back in Reconstruction. Live with your head in the lion's mouth. I want you to overcome 'em with yeses, undermine 'em with grins, agree 'em to death and destruction. Let 'em swallow you till they vomit or bust wide open. They thought the old man had gone out of his mind. He had been the meekest of men. The younger children were rushed from the room, the shades drawn, and the flame of the lamp turned so low that it sputtered on the wick like the old man's breathing. Learn it to the young uns, he whispered fiercely. Then he died. And maybe I'm reading too much into it because I'm trying to presuppose my own conclusions. But in the second paragraph, I just think there's a low-level humour, there's an irony there, the way it's written, but also it's written beautifully. So the comparison of the old man's breathing with the lamp turned so low it sputtered on the wick. Learn it to the young uns. Now this refers to when they go to the ballroom and the strippers there. We were rushed to the front of the ballroom where it smelled even more strongly of tobacco and whiskey. Then we were pushed into place. I almost wet my pants. A sea of faces, some hostile, some amused, ringed around us, and in the centre, facing us, stood a magnificent blonde, stark naked. There was dead silence. I felt a blast of cold air chill me. I tried to back away, but they were behind me and around me. And you have to factor into this that for a black man to be looking at a white woman is just a recipe in those days for absolute disaster. And I think the way it's described in the novel, half the men in the audience are shouting at them to look, and the other half are shouting at them not to look. So there's this never-ending double bind that they're trying to live within. Some of the boys stood with lowered heads, trembling. I felt a wave of irrational guilt and fear. My teeth chattered, my skin turned to goose flesh, my knees knocked. Yet I was strongly attracted and looked in spite of myself. Had the price of looking been blindness, I would have looked. The hair was yellow like that of a circus Cupid doll, the face heavily powdered and rouged as though to form an abstract mask, the eyes hollow and smeared a cool blue, the colour of a baboon's butt. And the way he just mixes the vernacular with the profound, it's just absolutely brilliant. It's the alienation of the stripper, just absolutely reduced to a doll-like object. And I had no idea what a Cupid doll was, so here's an image of the analogy being made. And then it's, again, just to underline the extent to which he writes about, horrible things, but he still manages to do it beautifully. This is the incident, the anger and the chaos in the room of these white men and the animalism of them. And all the while, the blonde continued dancing, smiling faintly at the big shots who watched her with fascination and faintly smiling at our fear. I noticed a certain merchant who followed her hungrily, his lips loose and drooling. He was a large man who wore diamond studs and a shirt front which swelled with the ample paunch underneath. And each time the blonde swayed her undulating hips, he ran his hand through the thin hair of his bald head, and with his arms upheld, his posture clumsy like that of an intoxicated panda, wound his belly in a slow and obscene grind. This creature was completely hypnotized. The music had quickened. As the dancer flung herself about with a detached expression on her face, the men began reaching out to touch her. I could see their beefy fingers sink into the soft flesh. Some of the others tried to stop them, and she began to move around the floor in graceful circles as they gave chase, slipping and sliding over the polished floor. It was mad. Chairs went crashing, drinks were spilt as they ran laughing and howling after her. They caught her just as she reached the door, raised her from the floor, and tossed her as a college boys are tossed at hazing. And above her red, thick, smiling lips, I saw the terror and disgust in her eyes, almost like my own terror and that which I saw in some of the other boys. As I watched, they tossed her twice, and her soft breasts seemed to flatten against the air, and her legs flung wildly as she spun. Some of the more sober ones helped her to escape, and I started off the floor, heading for the anteroom with the rest of the boys. And it's what I think he does brilliantly is later on in chapter 3, there's a major ruckus at the brothel, and this time they're black participants, but this is the white chaos and the barely controlled, because luckily some people help the stripper get away, but how easily this rage and this crowd mentality, the madness of crowds. And he writes in it's heartbreaking. I don't think it was published on his lifetime, but in 1997, it was published 3 years after he died. He writes this heart-wrenching short story about a lynching that's called A Party Down at the Square that you can find online. And again, it's this osmotic spread almost, if that's the right phrase for this, the madness of crowds, the way that this mimetic frenzy develops. And I've always disliked crowds exactly because of that. In its positive form, it's at sporting events, pop concerts, whatever. But there's just the crowd mentality, the seething nature of it underneath. When I reached home, everyone was excited. Oh, sorry, I should have put this in context. He's just made a speech immediately after the fight. His mouth's still full of blood. You know, he's got a black eye. His face is completely swollen. But he's a very good speaker, and they ask him to make this speech. And it all goes down very well, and he's given a scholarship and a brand new briefcase. So when I reached home, everyone was excited. Next day, the neighbours came to congratulate me. I even felt safe from grandfather, whose deathbed curse usually spoiled my triumphs. I stood beneath his photograph with my briefcase in hand and smiled triumphantly into his stolid black peasant's face. It was a face that fascinated me. The eyes seemed to follow everywhere I went. That night I dreamed I was at a circus with him, and he refused to laugh at the clowns no matter what they did. Then later he told me to open my briefcase and read what was inside, and I did, finding an official envelope stamped with a state seal. And inside the envelope I found another and another endlessly, and I thought I would fall of weariness. "Them's years," he said, "now open that one." And I did, and in it I found an engraved document containing a short message in letters of gold. "Read it," my grandfather said, out loud. "To whom it may concern," I intoned, "keep this black boy running." I woke with the old man's laughter ringing in my ears. It was a dream I was to remember and dream again for many years after. But at that time I had no insight into its meaning. First, I had to attend college. And this presence of his grandfather, and I mentioned earlier the notion of the relationship between middle-class blacks and peasants at the time. And later on in chapter 3, there's a surgeon whose career is cut short by the fact he is black and he can't get proper professional opportunities. But he refers to peasant knowledge and the wisdom within it, which has always interested me because I think I've done other videos on fairy tales and myths and all these things. And it's arguably another aspect of culture that's being lost as we become more and more mechanized. So the video I did on Paul Kingsnorth's Against the Machine. But I like the way he does it in the form of a dream. So this grandfather's obviously a strong presence in his psychological life. And it's very Freudian the way he does this. And also, again, beyond, this is why I think Ellison's so brilliant, beyond the specifics of black identity and the social conditions of black people at that time, there is an element of all power structures, because he's very critical of the power structure at the black college. All power structure, all huge bureaucracies. The game is rigged to some extent, so everyone is kept running. You keep opening these envelopes, and you're strung along. It's like Kafka, der Prozess in German, the trial and the process. It's the same word in German. And Kafka's constant obsession about not being able to step out of these all-encompassing, disorientating, discombobulating processes that control us rather than us controlling them. And then I love this. He sets this scene. The black college is like a Garden of Eden. He does it brilliantly. It was a beautiful college. The buildings are old and covered with vines, and the roads gracefully winding, lined with hedges and wild roses that dazzled the eyes in the summer sun. Honeysuckle and purple wisteria hung heavy from the trees, and white magnolias mixed with their scents in the bee-humming air. I've recalled it often here in my hole, how the grass turned green in the springtime, and how the mockingbirds fluttered their tails and sang, how the moon shone down on the buildings, how the bell in the chapel tower rang out the precious short-lived hours, how the girls in the bright summer dresses promenaded the grassy lawn. And it's particular, as we'll see, when he goes off campus and you see what exists outside the campus. This is particularly poignant. But I'd also think it's relevant to identity politics today, the extent to which a lot of the craziest ideas are dreamt up in these campuses that I've spent a lot of my professional life in, that are these havens away from the real world. And I think it's an undercurrent of Ellison's writing that whilst he was completely in favour of education and the pursuit of knowledge, there was this artificiality to certain environments. And they, like I say, this idea that this is Edenic, this is somehow not real. And especially for black people at the time, when you've got images like this of Harlem. It's so long ago and far away that here in my invisibility, I wonder if it happened at all. Then in my mind's eye, I see the bronze statue of the college founder, the cold father symbol, his hands outstretched in the breathtaking gesture of lifting a veil that flutters in hard metallic folds above the face of a kneeling slave. And I am standing puzzled, unable to decide whether the veil is really being lifted or lowered more firmly in place, whether I am witnessing a revelation or a more efficient blinding. And as I gaze, there is a rustle of wings, and I see a flock of starlings flighting before me. And when I look again, the bronze face, whose empty eyes look upon a world I have never seen, runs with liquid chalk, creating another ambiguity to puzzle my groping mind. Why is a bird-soiled statue more commanding than one that is clean? It's just a great idea. It's the time marked, even with bird. What do they call it? Bird guano. I just think it's a brilliant counterintuitive idea that statues look more commanding when they've got bird ordure on them. But I just think I've emboldened, whether I am witnessing a revelation or a more efficient blinding, this brilliant image of a statue. Is it about liberation or is it about the enchainment? And it begs the question of philanthropy in general, or those who present themselves as saving people, the college founder. To what extent is that type of altruism poisoned by narcissism, delusions of grandeur, and so on? O long green stretch of campus, O quiet songs at dusk, O moon that kissed the steeple and flooded the perfumed nights, O bugle that called in the morning, O drum that marched us militarily at noon, what was real? What solid? What more than a pleasant time-killing dream? For how could it have been real if now I am invisible? If real, why is it that I can recall in all that island of greenness no fountain, but one that was broken, corroded, and dry? And why does no rain fall through my recollections, sound through my memories, soak through the hard, dry crust of the still so recent past? Why do I recall, instead of the odour of the seed bursting in springtime, only the yellow contents of the cistern spread over the lawn's dead grass? Why and how and why? They're all such a part of that other life that's dead that I can't remember them all. Time was as I was, but neither that time nor that I are anymore. So I just think it's a brilliant, and regulars on the channel know my Proust fixation, but it's such a succinct, the last little paragraph there, that other life that's dead that I can't remember them at all. So this idea that our life's memories of things that just seem so foreign and yet we lived through them, but it just seems to be a different person in a different era. I just love the absolute poetry of that line. Time was as I was, but neither that time nor that I are anymore. So now he takes Mr. Norton, this is the narrator, takes Mr. Norton off the campus. We were beyond the farthest extension of the school-owned land now, and I suddenly decided to turn off the highway. Big mistake. Down a road that seemed unfamiliar. There were no trees and the air was brilliant. Far down the road the sun glared cruelly against a tin sign nailed to a barn. A lone figure bending over a hoe on the hillside raised up wearily and waved, more a shadow against the skyline than a man. Again, I just think it's absolutely brilliant writing. The way in which the person, not dehumanized, but just turned into something insignificant because they're just a tiny part of the landscape, more a shadow against the skyline than a man. So then this is Mr. Norton speaking, the wealthy old white philanthropist. I have wealth and a reputation and prestige, all that is true. But your great founder had more than that. He had tens of thousands of lives dependent upon his ideas and upon his actions. What he did affected your whole race. In a way, he had the power of a king, or in a sense, of a god. That, I've come to believe, is more important than my own work, because more depends upon you. You are important, because if you fail, I have failed by one individual, one defective cog. It didn't matter so much before, but now I'm growing old and it has become very important. But you don't even know my name, I thought, wondering what it was all about. And then Mr. Norton again. I suppose it's difficult for you to understand how this concerns me. But as you develop, you must remember that I am dependent upon you to learn my fate. He keeps talking in the car journey, Mr. Norton, about his destiny and his fate. And it begs, again, I just think it's brilliant insight from Ellison, the psychological insight as to what motivates incredibly rich people, because they've got all the money for physical, material comfort, and then they begin to get obsessed about their legacy. And there are complex questions, as I said, about to what extent is altruism actually deep down quite selfish. This idea with power comes great responsibility. It's a double-edged, almost like heart of darkness type idea. This idea that in a way he'd have the power of a king or in a sense of a god. This is what happens in Conrad's Heart of Darkness. When, power goes to your head, while everybody else loses theirs in that novel. Then as we took a hill, we were swept by a wave of scorching air, and it was as though we were approaching a desert. It almost took my breath away, and I leaned over and switched on the fan, hearing its sudden whir. I think it's brilliant the way there's this sudden dichotomy between the relative coolness of the campus and then not far away, all of a sudden it feels like a desert. Thank you, and this is Mr. Norton, he said as a slight breeze filled the car. We were passing a collection of shacks and log cabins now, bleached white and warped by the weather. Sun-tortured shingles lay on the roofs like decks of water-soaked cards spread out to dry. The houses consisted of 2 square rooms joined together by a common floor and roof with a porch in between. As we passed, we could look through to the fields beyond. I stopped the car at his excited command in front of a house set off from the rest. This is where the trouble starts. Is that a log cabin? It was an old cabin with its chinks filled with chalk white clay with bright new shingles patching its roof. Suddenly I was sorry that I had blundered down this road. I recognised the place as soon as I saw the group of children in stiff new overalls who played near a rickety fence. Yes, sir, it's a log cabin, I said. And what becomes interesting about this encounter with this guy, Jim Trueblood, who, like I said, impregnates both his wife and his daughter, I struggle to think of how anyone would be able to write about this today for so many reasons. In some ways, literature's become more prudish. There are certain things you can't write about. And especially the idea it doesn't reflect well, to say the least, upon this peasant black man and the type of identity politics that would stop anyone writing about that honestly, which I think Ellison still does brilliantly. And this is the narrator talking about Jim Trueblood. I saw him bite into a plug of chewing tobacco. Something tinkled against the porch, and I picked it up, gazing at it from time to time. It was a hard red apple stamped out of tin. So I think this would back my idea up that it's the Garden of Eden they've left. It was a hard red apple stamped out of tin. And again, later on, the references Ellison includes in the description, Jim Trueblood gives this account and basically talks about the incident. They all sleep together, the wife, his daughter, and him, while the little kids sleep in a different bed, and it's partly because it's so cold, they all need to stay warm. And he gives this dream scenario. He said, I was having this dream, and that's how he excuses his actions to himself. But part of the description is it was dark, plum black, so again, the concept of fruit, the forbidden fruit. Black as the middle of a bucket of tar, which I'd argue is reminiscent of Brer Rabbit, the language used in those tales. And I won't go into too much gory detail because the way Jim Trueblood explains, it's just done so brilliantly by Ellison. But in terms of Jim Trueblood's inability to stop doing what he's doing, I just think this following passage is amazing. I can't tell how it was. It's like when a real drinking man gets drunk, or when a real sanctified religious woman gets so worked up she jumps out of her clothes, or when a real gambling man keeps on gambling when he's losing. You got hold to it and you can't let go even though you want to. This idea of addictive behaviour or self-destructive behaviour, I just think the psychological insight, and it's again the humour. So the idea of a sanctified religious woman gets so worked up she jumps out of her clothes, and then I think his wife sees what's gone on and starts to attack him, and he describes his paralysis, not just of fear but everything, just the reality of what he's done starts to sink in. I was frozen to where I was like a young'un, what done stuck his lip to a pump handle in the winter time. Again, just brilliant idea. I was just like a jaybird that the yellow jacket's done stung till he's paralysed, but still alive in his eyes, and he's watching him sting his body to death. It's horrible, but brilliantly expressed image again. Now we're getting on to chapter 3, my absolute favourite. And what he's describing is he describes at the beginning of chapter 3, it looks like a chain gang, but it's all the shell-shocked veterans from the asylum. They've all, in various degrees lost their mind. So I think the person leading them thinks he's a drum major. And when they go past in the car with Mr. Norton, he's blocking the road. But the narrator's quick-witted enough to tell him it's an American general. And that's why he steps aside, because they're all delusional. And in the actual incident later on, it fuels the chaos, but also adds to the humour as these people say ridiculous things. So many of the men had been doctors, lawyers, teachers, civil service workers. There were several cooks, a preacher, a politician, and an artist. This is my favourite line. One very nutty one had been a psychiatrist. Whenever I saw them, I felt uncomfortable. They were supposed to be members of the professions toward which, at various times, I vaguely aspired myself. And even though they never seemed to me, I could never believe that they were really patients. So they're in this asylum, but they were the creme de la creme of black society to some extent. Sometimes it appeared as though they were played some vast and complicated game with me and the rest of the school folk, meaning the people at the college, a game whose goal was laughter and whose rule and subtleties I could never grasp. And again, it's brilliant psychological insight, because for all the apparent madness of these people and their mental conditions, they see reality more truthfully and more honestly than the bigwigs running the black college, who've sold their soul to the devil in various ways. And this is one of Ellison's photographs. It's called 125th Street, Harlem, 1940s. And I just want to give you an example of what I would call the beauty of the way Ellison writes. So he's taken Mr. Norton into the brothel, and because he's collapsed and he needs whiskey. And that's not easy, because this Halley guy who runs the bar, won't let him just buy some whiskey and take it out. He forces him to bring Mr. Norton in. So I saw Halley tilt the bottle and the oily amber of brandy sloshing into the glass. Then, tilting Mr. Norton's head back, I put the glass to his lips and poured. A fine brown stream ran from the corner of his mouth down his delicate chin. The room was suddenly quiet. I felt a slight movement against my hand, like a child's breast when it whimpers at the end of a spell of crying. The fine-veined eyelids flickered. He coughed. I saw a slow red flush creep, then spurt up his neck, spreading over his face. I don't know if I'm overemphasizing it, but I just think that sentence, I felt a slight movement against my hand like a child's breast when it whimpers at the end of a spell of crying, is absolutely stunning. It's the type of expression that, again, philosophy or psychology can't express something in that metaphorical way. Or it's an analogy, technically, I suppose. That's another Ralph Ellison photo from the 1940s. So he looked about him, Mr. Norton. I followed his eyes and was amazed to see the varied expressions on the patients' faces as they silently returned his gaze. Some were hostile, some cringing, some horrified, some, who, when among themselves were most violent, now appeared as submissive as children, and some seemed strangely amused. Again, it's just relatively simple writing, but the way he conveys the idea that all these mentally ill black men who are, in some senses, who were professionals but are now at the bottom of the social ladder, the atmosphere in the brothel has changed. And he just captures the tension and that throwaway line at the end, and some seemed strangely amused. Now, if you'll bear with me, this is a photograph from 1944. It's called Grease Plant Workers, 1944. But I wanted to read it's called the Golden Day, the brothel, bar, whatever entity this place is. But there's this huge fight scene where it all kicks off, and Supercargo is the name of the orderly who's supposed to control these people, but he's up in one of the rooms having it off with one of the women, and that's the context. So a shower of bottles and glasses splashing whiskey crashed against the balcony. This is Supercargo standing at the top of the balcony. He shouted down to all the veterans to stop, basically rioting. So a shower of bottles and glasses splashing whiskey crashed against the balcony because they all start throwing things at him. I saw Supercargo snap suddenly erect and grab his forehead, his face bathed in whiskey. Eee! He cried. Eee! Sorry, it's not very realistic. Then I saw him wave, rigid from his ankles upward. For a moment, the men on the stairs were motionless, watching him. Then they sprang forward. It's like a low-level battle of Thermopylae. You stood at the top of the stairs, and they're going at him one by one because it's a narrow staircase. But they've wounded him with whiskey, bottles being lobbed at him. Supercargo grabbed wildly at the balustrade as they snatched his feet from beneath him and started down. And this is why it's funny and horrible at the same time. His head bounced against the steps, making a sound like a series of gunshots as they ran, dragging him by his ankles, like volunteer firemen running with a hose. The crowd surged forward. Hallie yelled near my ear. I saw the man being dragged toward the centre of the room. Give the bastard some order. Here, I'm 45, and he's been acting like he's my old man. So you like to kick, huh? A tall man said, aiming a shot at the attendant's head at Supercargo. The flesh above his right eye jumped out as if it had been inflated. Then I heard Mr. Norton beside me shouting, No, no, not when he's down. Listen at the white folks, someone said. He the white folks man. Men were jumping upon Supercargo with both feet now, and I felt such an excitement that I wanted to join them. Even the girls were yelling, Give it to him good. He never pays me. Kill him. Please you all, not in here, not in my place. You can't speak your mind when he's on duty. Hell no. Somehow I got pushed away from Mr. Norton and found myself beside the man called Sylvester. Watch this, schoolboy, he said. See there where his ribs are bleeding. I nodded my head. Now don't move your eyes. I watched the spot as though compelled, just beneath the lower rib and above the hip bone, as Sylvester measured carefully with his toe and kicked as though he was punting a football. Supercargo let out a groan like an injured horse. Try it, schoolboy. It feels so good. It gives you relief, Sylvester said. Sometimes I get so afraid of him, I feel that he's inside my head. There, he said, giving Supercargo another kick. As I watched, a man sprang on Supercargo's chest with both feet. And he lost consciousness. They began throwing cold beer on him, reviving him, only to kick him unconscious again. Soon he was drenched in blood and beer. The bastard's out cold. Throw him out. No, wait a minute. Give me a hand, someone. They threw him upon the bar, stretching him out with his arms folded across his chest like a corpse. Now let's have a drink. Hallie was slow in getting behind the bar, and they cursed him. Get back there and serve us, you big sack of fat. Give me a rye. Up here, funk buster. Shake them sloppy hips. Okay, take it easy, Hallie said, rushing to pour them drinks. Just put y'all's money where your mouth is. With Supercargo lying helpless upon the bar, the men whirled around like maniacs. The excitement seemed to have tilted some of the more delicately balanced ones too far. Some made hostile speeches at the top of their voices against the hospital, the state, and the universe. The one who called himself a composer was banging away the one wild piece he seemed to know on the out-of-tune piano, striking the keyboard with fists and elbows, and filling in other effects in a bass voice that moaned like a bear in agony. One of the most educated ones touched my arm. He was a former chemist who was never seen without a shining Phi Beta Kappa key. The men have lost control, he said through the uproar. I think you'd better leave. I'm trying to, I said, as soon as I can get over to my Mr. Norton. Mr. Norton was gone from where I'd left him. I rushed here and there through the noisy men, calling his name. When I found him, he was under the stairs. Somehow he had been pushed there by the scuffling, reeling men, and he lay sprawled in the chair like an aged doll. In the dim light, his features were sharp and white, and his closed eyes well-defined lines and a well-tooled face. I shouted his name above a roar of the men and got no answer. He was out again. I shook him gently, then roughly, but still no flicker of his wrinkled lids. Then some of the milling men pushed me up against him, and suddenly a mass of whiteness was looming, 2 inches from my eyes. It was only his face, but I felt a shudder of nameless horror. I had never been so close to a white person before. In a panic, I struggled to get away. With his eyes closed, he seemed more threatening than with them open. He was like a formless white death, suddenly appeared before me, a death which had been there all the time, and which now revealed itself in the madness of the golden day. "Stop screaming," a voice commanded, and I felt myself pulled away. It was the short, fat man. I clamped my mouth shut, aware for the first time that the shrill sound was coming from my own throat. I saw the man's face relax as he gave me a wry smile. "That's better," he shouted into my ear. "He's only a man. Remember that. He's only a man." Well, the bit where he sees the white face of Mr. Norton and it leers up, it's almost like Hitchcock has in his films this notion of, I think it's called a Hitchcockian blot, when the camera goes out of focus and you see something really close up. It's at the beginning of Rear Window when the Grace Kelly character leans in to kiss James Stewart and all you see is this white blob. And it's quite disorientating. I just think it's brilliantly described there. And then to start summing things up, this is the conversation. Mr. Norton's woken up, and the short, fat guy who was an ex neurologist, I think he was, but very qualified, competent doctor. So they start talking, and I just think it's one of the best scenes in the whole book. "Oh, yes, and how long were you in France?" Mr. Norton asked. "Long enough," and this is the short, fat man, the doctor, "long enough to forget some fundamentals which I should never have forgotten." "What fundamentals?" Mr. Norton said. "What do you mean?" The vet smiled and cocked his head. "Things about life, such things as most peasants and folk peoples almost always know through experience, though seldom through conscious thought." I just think that's a crucial phrase, and it goes back to the grandfather, this psychological presence in the narrator's life. It's what the peasant knows, no matter how educated you get. There's peasant knowledge. Such things as most peasants and folk peoples almost always know, and it's seldom through conscious thought. "Are you sure you would like to hear that?" the vet asked. "Why, of course." And then you find out the minute he gets told the truth of what the vet thinks, he can't handle it. It's like that line from the film, "You can't handle the truth." And then I just think it gets so poetically brilliant, the writing. So this is the short, fat doctor talking to Mr. Norton. And again, remember, it's in the context of how unusual this would be for a black man to talk to a rich white man like this. "Rest, rest," he said, fixing Mr. Norton with his eyes. "The clocks are all set back, and the forces of destruction are rampant down below. They might suddenly realise that you are what you are, and then your life wouldn't be worth a piece of bankrupt stock. You would be cancelled, perforated, voided, become the recognised magnet attracting loose screws. Then what would you do? Such men are beyond money, and with supercargo down, out like a felled ox, they know nothing of value. To some, you are the great white father, to others, the lyncher of souls. But for all, you are confusion come even into the golden day." It's almost biblical at the end. But the way he just puts him in his place, pointing out that no matter how powerful you are, there are certain scenarios where your life wouldn't be worth a piece of bankrupt stock. And the recognised magnet attracting loose screws, just brilliantly written. And then this is a poignant image, just to give you some context of the time. This was called the doll test. It was in Harlem, and it was a Dr. Kenneth Clark and a Dr. Mamie Clark. They were the first African American man and woman to earn a PhD in psychology from Columbia University in the early 40s. And their research was used, I think, in school desegregation lawsuits. So there was the famous one, Brown versus the Board of Education, 1954 in America. But they were just doing studies with black kids as to which doll do you think is, looks nice, or which do you prefer. They're just quite evocative photographs. Now the doctor's talking to Mr. Norton about the narrator. You see, he said, turning to Mr. Norton, he has eyes and ears and a good distended African nose, but he fails to understand the simple facts of life. Understand? It's worse than that. He registers with his senses, but short-circuits his brain. Nothing has meaning. He takes it in, but he doesn't digest it. Already he is, well, bless my soul, behold, a walking zombie. Already he's learned to repress not only his emotions, but his humanity. He's invisible, a walking personification of the negative, the most perfect achievement of your dreams, sir, the mechanical man. So again, it's specifically about the relationship with this white philanthropist, and he's basically getting called out by this doctor. But at the same time, it has wider relevance to everyone in advanced industrial civilization. We all become these mechanical human beings, the walking zombies. And this is a beautiful photograph. It's called American Gothic, and this was by Gordon Parks. And she's called Ella Watson, was a janitor lady in one of the buildings he got speaking to. So he's doing a pastiche on the famous painting American Gothic. So this is Mr. Norton. I came out of illness. He's asking, why is he there? So I came out of illness, or rather he brought me, Mr. Norton said. Of course, but you came and it was fitting. What do you mean, said Mr. Norton. He's beginning to show irritation. A little child shall lead them, the vet said with a smile. But seriously, because you both fail to understand what's happening to you, you cannot see or hear or smell the truth of what you see. And you, looking for destiny, it's classic. And the boy, this automaton, he was made out of the very mud of the region, and he sees far less than you. Poor stumblers, neither of you can see the other. To you, he is that mark on the scorecard of your achievement. A thing and not a man, a child or even less, a black amorphous thing. And you, for all your power, are not a man to him, but a god, a force. Well, there's two things I'd say there. One is that the subtitle of Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin was The Man That Was a Thing. She changed it, but I think that was the original subtitle. So the man that was a thing, and that's exactly in this quote, a thing and not a man. And then just again to illustrate the subtlety of the references, when he says a little child shall lead them. This is a quote from Isaiah chapter 11, verse 6. The wolf also shall dwell with the lamb. The leopard shall lie down with the young goat. The calf and the young lion and the fatling together. And a little child shall lead them. So despite having said he wanted to hear what the doctor had to say, most people say, yeah, I really want to hear it, and they don't. As I said, you can't handle the truth. Mr. Norton stood up abruptly. Let us go, young man, he said angrily. No, listen, he believes in you as he believes in the beat of his heart. He believes in that great false wisdom taught slaves and pragmatists alike, that white is right. And I'd argue you could extend that to might is right for whatever race you are. I can tell you his destiny. He'll do your bidding, and for that his blindness is his chief asset. He's your man, friend, your man and your destiny. Now the two of you descend that stirs into chaos and get the hell out of here. I'm sick of both of you pitiful obscenities. Get out before I do you the favour of bashing in your heads. I saw his motion toward the big white pitcher on the washstand, and I stepped between him and Mr. Norton, guiding Mr. Norton swiftly through the doorway. Looking back, I saw him leaning against the wall, making a sound that was a blending of laughter and tears. And I think that last bit, again, it goes to Ellison's brilliant skill at combining the serious and the humorous. And also, it's reminiscent, the doctor's losing his temper and he looks at the white picture. And the narrator gets the sense he really could bash their brains in, he's that angry. But I remember reading in James Baldwin's memoirs, he went to see a film in Trenton, I think that's New Jersey, I think that is. He went to see a film and with a friend, and afterwards they went to a diner. And I think the diner was called American Diner. You couldn't make it up. And they wouldn't serve him because he was black. So then he deliberately went into a very high-class restaurant where they were never, ever going to serve him. I think the phrase he uses is, even the Virgin Mary's intercession wouldn't have got me served. And he engineers an argument with the waitress. And he said he sees a water pitcher. And he realised he was in a situation, he'd caused such a scene that his own life was potentially in danger if he didn't get out. But he also says, I saw this water pitcher. I think he actually throws it at her and misses. But he said, I threw it with the intent to kill. He was that angry. And then he reflects upon the levels of anger that you'd need to be. But he said, I was willing to do it. So that's the anger that Ellison's writing about at the end of chapter 3. But just to finish with just again the repetitious observation that I can't remember many novels that talk about such serious issues. A, so beautifully. B, retaining a sense of humour. And it goes back to the original comment he makes about the blues. Except the blues is a musical form that it's not noted for its humour. But the idea that sublimating pain into something artistic and worthwhile. So I hope I've convinced you that it's a beautiful novel, really, I'd argue, undervalued. And I'd encourage everyone to read it if you possibly can. So I'll just finish with a couple of images that are my favourite of the set of photographs Gordon Parks took to illustrate the novel.